Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Spooky month is coming, and I have no idea what to do. Look, I'm one guy operating several different podcasts and a YouTube channel while raising 2 kids. My creativity has long since been locked in the basement. So what do you want to see us do for Halloween? Leave your ideas in the comments. Now join me in the lounge. I bought a bonsai tree to help simulate tonight's theme: scary and true deep woods horror stories. Enjoy. These are tales from the break room. A story from a conservationist. From Anonymous. I've spent 12 years tracking bird migrations in Washington and Oregon. Last fall, I found out why every animal with a functioning brain was avoiding a particular valley in the Cascades. It started with data that didn't make sense. We'd been tracking several species that migrate through the same corridors year after year. They're creatures of habit, these birds. But about 3 years ago, multiple species started to take this massive detour around one specific area, adding 50 miles to avoid maybe 5 miles of valley. That kind of behavior usually means something catastrophic happened to the habitat. So I received funding to go investigate. It took me a while to convince the department, but eventually they gave me a grant for a 6-week study. I figured I'd find evidence of a chemical spill, or maybe some disease killing off the food sources. When I got there in September, the valley looked normal. Better than normal, actually. Untouched old-growth forest that developers would kill for, with clean streams and healthy undergrowth. Everything that a migrating bird could want. Except the birds were gone, and the same could be said for much of anything else. I set up my base camp at the north entrance and started doing standard surveys. The soil samples came back clean and the water tested fine. Plant diversity was exactly what you'd expect. But when I checked my motion sensor equipment after the first week, I had thousands of triggered photos showing absolutely nothing. Just empty forest. The cameras were working. I'd see a branch move or leaves stir, but no animals. The really strange part was finding where the deer trails just stopped. These paths that get worn down over decades of use, and they would just end abruptly at the valley perimeter. I followed one where the track showed a doe walking normally. Then suddenly the stride length tripled, indicating she'd started running back the way she came. But there were no predator tracks, no signs of a disturbance, just sudden panic. And then I started to find teeth. It happened on my 2nd week. They looked like human molars, scattered along the main trail like breadcrumbs, somehow fresh enough that some still had blood on the roots. I counted 43 teeth over a half-mile stretch. No other bones and no signs of violence, just teeth, placed there in the middle of the path where you'd have to step over them. There was an old Forest Service cabin about 3 miles into the valley. I'd been avoiding the place, camping in my tent instead at the valley entrance. But after finding the teeth, I decided I needed a more secure base. The hike to the cabin was the most uncomfortable 3 miles I've ever walked. Nothing happened, but that was the problem. In a healthy forest, things happen constantly. Birds will call and squirrels will argue. Insects buzz. This was just my footsteps and my breathing, and nothing else. The cabin was unlocked. Inside, someone had been living there recently. I found fresh food in the pantry with receipts from last month, and a clean sleeping bag on the cot. But covering one entire wall, there were hundreds of photographs. These weren't modern photos, but old Polaroids, all showing the same thing, close-ups of what appeared to be human skin. Different skin tones, some hairy, some smooth, some with moles or scars, but just skin. No faces, no identifying features. They were arranged by color gradient, light to dark, like paint samples. The logbook by the door had normal Forest Service entries up until last year. Then the handwriting changed. The new entries were just numbers. Measurements, maybe. Things like 7.3 inches, 2.1 pounds, with dates beside them. The final entry was from 3 days before I arrived. Almost ready. One more practice. I should have left. Instead, I convinced myself I was overreacting. Someone was playing an elaborate prank. Yeah, maybe a graduate student was doing some bizarre art project. So I stayed. That first night in the cabin, something breathed on the window. Not a tap or a scratch, it was definitely breathing. The glass fogged up in a perfect circle, about head height. Then another breath, lower down. Then another, at ground level, like something was crouching down, slowly. When I finally got the courage to look outside with my flashlight, there were no tracks in the dirt. But there was a handprint on the glass, from the inside. I checked every corner of that cabin. I was alone. The second day I tried to focus on my work. I set up more equipment and took more samples. I tried my best to ignore that feeling that something was walking exactly in step behind me, matching my pace perfectly. When I'd stop, the feeling would stop, and when I'd turn around, nothing. But once I stepped deliberately to the side without warning, and I heard one more footstep behind me before the silence caught up. That evening I saw my first real evidence. I was testing water pH at the creek when movement caught my eye upstream. There was someone there, kneeling by the water, washing something. They wore Forest Service khakis, but something was wrong about the way they moved, like extremely careful, as if their body was made of glass and they desperately wanted to avoid breaking. I called out a greeting. The figure slowly stood up without using its hands, just smoothly vertical, like they were pulled up rather than standing themselves up. The figure turned toward me, and I saw its face. It was completely normal, bland even. Generic male features, probably 30 years old. But the skin didn't fit right, like a mask, except it was definitely skin. I swear to God, I could see seams at the hairline that puckered slightly.
Hello,
it said, in a voice like someone had recorded 100 different people saying the word and played them all back at once.
I am practicing interactions.
I asked who they were, what they were doing out here. They said,
Becoming better at being seen.
Then, it tilted its head exactly 90 degrees sideways without moving its shoulders.
Your skin fits you so naturally. How long have you worn it?
I backed away. It didn't follow, instead watching me with unblinking eyes. When I was about 50 yards away, I saw it reach up and begin adjusting something at its hairline, pulling and smoothing like someone adjusting a ski mask. I ran back to the cabin and barricaded the door. I spent the night sitting against it with my knife out, listening. Around 3 a.m, something knocked. Not aggressively, but politely, 3 gentle raps. "I'm sorry if I startled you," came a perfect imitation of my own voice. "I'm still learning the appropriate boundaries. May I ask you some questions about your original form?" I didn't answer. My voice continued. "I can see you through the wall. Your heat signature is beautiful. All those warm organs tucked so neatly inside. Do you ever feel them move around? Do you notice your liver sliding against your ribs whenever you breathe?" It kept talking until dawn. Questions about human anatomy that were technically accurate, but deeply wrong in context. asking about the sensation of peristalsis, whether I could feel my cerebrospinal fluid circulating, if I'd ever counted my teeth from the inside using just my tongue. When sunrise came, the voice stopped mid-sentence. I waited another hour before opening that door. There were no footprints outside, but there was a neat pile of clothes on the doorstep, a Forest Service uniform. The fabric was still warm and slightly damp. I left immediately. I didn't pack my equipment up. I ran to my truck and drove straight back to Seattle. My official report was brief. Environmental factors were inconclusive. The area was unsuitable for continued study and dangerous. I recommended that no future research be taken. The department was more than unhappy about the abandoned equipment and my lack of results. I was chewed out, but luckily I didn't lose my job. I've been thinking about moving to a different department, a different place altogether. Maybe move to the Midwest, somewhere flat, somewhere with fewer forests, somewhere I can see things coming from miles away. But sometimes I wonder if running matters. I wonder if the thing in that valley was unique, or if there are more of them, learning to wear our shapes and practicing to become human, getting better every day at fitting in. I think about those photographs on the cabin wall quite frequently. All that skin carefully categorized, like someone studying for a test. Those clothes left on the doorstep still warm, still damp with something that wasn't quite sweat. The animals knew first. They always do, don't they? We're just slower to notice when something is wrong, too wrapped up on our data and theories and modern life to see what's right in front of us, or behind us. The Scout Stalker, from CarboHydrater. I've been involved with Boy Scouts for several years now, first as a parent volunteer and now as an assistant scoutmaster. Over that time, I've heard a lot of stories from other leaders at training sessions and summer camps. Most are funny mishaps, maybe close calls with wildlife. But there's one set of stories that's different. 3 separate scout leaders from different troops have told me about encounters with the same person. Or at least, we think it's the same person. The first story came from Harrison, a scoutmaster from a troop about 2 hours south of us. This was back in 2019, at a regional training weekend. We were sitting around after dinner, and someone mentioned dealing with difficult parents, which led to Harrison telling us about something that happened to his troop the previous summer. They were doing a 5-day backcountry trip in the National Forest, about 15 miles from any road. On the second night in, they'd made camp near a creek, and the boys were getting ready for bed. Harrison was doing a final head count when one of the younger scouts, a 12-year-old boy on his first real wilderness trip, came up and said there was a man standing in the woods, watching them. Harrison assumed, or rather hoped, it was just another hiker, someone who had made camp nearby. He grabbed his flashlight and walked over to where the kid was pointing. About 30 yards from their camp, just visible between the trees, was definitely a person, standing completely still. They weren't even trying to hide, but they weren't approaching either. Harrison called out hello and asked if they were okay or needed help. The figure didn't respond, didn't even move. They just stood there, so Harrison walked closer, keeping his flashlight on this individual. And then he saw the details that made him stop. The man was wearing clothes that didn't match, a suit jacket over cargo shorts, dress shoes with no socks, a winter hat despite it being July. And his face was dirty, streaked with something dark. It could have been mud or dirt, but it was applied with purpose and patterns, like a football fan's face paint. And he was smiling. This was no friendly smile. Harrison described it as a kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Harrison told the man this was a scout camp and asked once more if he needed some help. The man finally spoke, but what he said didn't make sense. He said,
"The young ones, they have such clean feet. Do they know about the crawling time yet?"
Harrison immediately went into protection mode. He kept himself between the man and the campsite, telling him firmly that he needed to move along. The man laughed. Harrison described it as the sound a dog might make if it could laugh. And then he asked,
"Which one is your favorite? The small blonde one? He looks tender."
That's when Harrison radioed the other adult leader to get all the boys into their tents and zip them up. He stood there for about 10 more minutes, flashlight on this man who was just standing there still smiling. Then, without warning, the man dropped to all fours and scuttled backwards into the darkness. And I mean scuttled, sideways like a crab, faster than you'd expect. They kept watch all night. Around 3 a.m., they heard someone singing softly from different points around their camp.
"You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away."
But they never saw him again. They packed up at first light and hiked out a day early. Harrison filed a report with the Rangers, but nothing came of it. The second story I heard about 6 months later from Paula. She leads a troop 3 towns over from mine. Her encounter was different, but had enough similarities that it made me connect the two. Paula's troop was doing orienteering training in state forest land. There were groups of 3 scouts each, navigating between checkpoints with compasses and maps. Paula was stationed at checkpoint 4, waiting for the groups to come through. She'd been there about an hour when she noticed someone moving through the woods to her east. At first, she thought it was a scout group that went off course. But as the figure got closer, she realized it was an adult man, and he was following one of the scout groups from a distance. The boys didn't seem to know he was there. He was staying about 50 yards back, moving when they moved, stopping when they stopped. Paula immediately radioed the other leaders and started moving toward the scouts. As she got closer, she got a better look at the man. Mismatched clothes again. Rain boots with suit pants, a Hawaiian shirt under a heavy winter coat, despite it being warm. His hair was long and matted with leaves and twigs wound into it. She said it almost looked on purpose, like decoration. When Paula intercepted the scout group and told them to head directly to the next checkpoint, where another leader was waiting, the man stepped out from behind a tree. He was holding something. It looked like tufts of hair, and it wasn't his hair. There were different shades of hair. Some blonde, some light brown, some darker. He held out the hair toward the boys like he was offering candy.
"Would you like to trade?"
he asked.
"Your hair for my hair? I've been collecting it from brave boys like you."
Paula put herself between him and the scouts and told them to run to the next checkpoint, quick. They did. The man didn't try to follow them. He stood there, shaking the hair in his cupped hands. Then he looked at Paula and said,
"You're too old. Your hair's all ruined. But those boys, they're still fresh."
She backed away, keeping eyes on him, until she herself reached the next checkpoint. By then, other leaders had arrived. When they went back to look for the man, he was gone. But they did find a neat pile of hair where he'd been standing. The police said without DNA testing they couldn't confirm whether the hair was human or not, and the department didn't have budget for that unless an actual crime had been committed. The third story is the most recent. and the most disturbing. This came from Joaquin at the big regional jamboree this past summer. His troop had an encounter. They were camping at an established scout camp, the kind with permanent structures and designated sites. Should have been much safer than camping in the woods. In the middle of the night, Joaquin woke up to one of his boys crying. This kid, he was 14 years old, a tough kid usually, was standing outside Joaquin's tent, trembling. The boy said he had gotten up to use the bathroom, and when he came back, someone was in his sleeping bag, in his tent. He thought it was another scout messing with him, until he realized all 3 of his tent mates were still in their bags. So there was a 4th person in the tent, in the kid's sleeping bag, facing away from the entrance. Joaquin grabbed his flashlight and went to check. Sure enough, there was someone in the sleeping bag, and it was no child. Whoever it was an adult, and they weren't moving. Joaquin shouted for them to get out, and slowly the figure sat up and turned around. Again, this person wore mismatched clothes. Looked like he was wearing multiple shirts and a child's rain jacket that didn't close around him fully, and pants that were far too short. His face had those same dirt markings, the ones that looked like they had been applied. And he had that same creepy smile. But this time Joaquin noticed his fingernails. They were incredibly long and had been filed or perhaps chewed to points. The man crawled out of the tent on all 4s, dragging the sleeping bag with him briefly before letting it go. He stood up right in front of Joaquin, close enough that Joaquin could smell him. He smelled like wet pennies and spoiled milk. The man whispered,
"The boy kept it warm for me, so I kept it warm for him."
Then he reached out with those pointed nails and touched Joaquin's chest, just lightly, leaving small tears in his shirt.
"You're keeping them too safe. Boys need danger to grow properly. I have ideas for you."
Joaquin yelled for the other leaders, and the man turned and walked into the woods. Not ran, but walked, humming something that sounded like a lullaby. They found footprints the next morning that led to the camp's fence line, then nothing else. The fence was 8 feet tall with barbed wire on top. No sign of how he got over it, or if he did. Here's what makes these stories especially concerning. These campsites were in different states, hundreds of miles apart, at different times of year, different troops with no connection to each other. But the description is always similar. The mismatched clothes, the dirt patterns on his face, the way he moves, sometimes on all 4s, sometimes sideways, the obsession with the boys, their warmth. We've started sharing information between troops now. There have been 2 more possible sightings since Joaquin's encounter. One group found a shelter made of sticks near their camp, with scout handbooks arranged inside. Another found footprints that followed their hiking trail for miles, always staying just off the path, with those same long toenail marks in the dirt. Some of us think he might be accessing troop information somehow, looking up public event calendars or social media posts about camping trips. That would explain how he finds different groups in wilderness areas. But it doesn't explain what he wants, or why he hasn't actually hurt anyone yet. The optimistic view is that he's just a mentally ill homeless person who has a fixation on scouts, but is essentially harmless. But those fingernails filed to points suggest preparation. The hair he was carrying, the way he got into that tent, into that sleeping bag without waking anyone. These feel like escalations. We've reported everything to both local and federal authorities. They take the reports, but say without actual assault or crimes beyond trespassing, there's not a lot they can do about it. One ranger suggested he might be a former scout himself. someone who had a breakdown and was trying to relive something from his youth. But that does not explain the predatory behavior, or the comments about the boys being tender or fresh. We've had to change how we do camping trips now. There's always 3 adults minimum. No scout goes anywhere alone, even to the bathroom. We post watches through the night. We vary our locations last minute whenever possible. Some troops have stopped doing backcountry camping altogether, sticking to established camps with better security. But established camps don't guarantee safety. Joaquin's encounter proved that. We don't know his name. We don't know where he comes from or where he goes between encounters. We just know he's out there, watching our boys and getting bolder. Off the Trail, from Ndstructable. I want to share an experience that happened to me and my friends right after high school graduation, during the summer of 2004. It all started when we went hiking in a remote part of the wilderness. To give some context to this experience, I need to explain how my friends and I met, namely one of them who got us into this mess. I grew up with my best friend, Chad. We were inseparable, almost like brothers, until 6th grade, when someone came that would change our lives. That spring, a new student joined our school. His name was Shad. Shad was unusually tall for a 6th grader, 6'6" to be exact. He had fair skin and thick brown hair that looked like strands of yarn. Everything about him was awkward. His movements, his mannerisms, even his backstory. He said he'd moved to town from an Indian reservation. Initially, he was polite to everyone, but when people started to joke about how his name rhymed with Chad's, Shad began picking on Chad relentlessly. Shad's bullying lasted for the rest of the school year. I should also mention he stayed with his aunt and uncle just down the street from Chad, but he didn't make any real friends. Probably because he bullied just about everyone. During the summer, we'd often ride our bikes past his house. He was often outside shooting hoops and would shout insults or taunt us as we passed by. We weren't exactly kind in return. One day while we were riding by, a basketball came out of nowhere and smashed Chad in the face. Chad crashed hard onto the pavement. Then Shad came after him, and the two started to fight. Thankfully, our elderly neighbor, Mr. Johnson, stepped in and broke it up. He called 911. Chad ended up with a broken nose, 2 black eyes, and scraped up arms. It was pretty bad. The day after that, Shad was gone. His aunt and uncle said he'd gone home, and Chad's parents, though furious, seemed content with that resolution. They enrolled Chad in jiu-jitsu with me after that incident. He recovered quickly, though he was disappointed that he didn't have any cool scars to show for it. We didn't see Shad for the rest of the summer or 7th grade. The next summer he briefly reappeared, but he avoided us whenever he saw us. By the time 8th grade rolled around, what happened was just a bad memory. That changed during the first day of summer after 8th grade. I was over at Chad's house, watching him play Final Fantasy VII, when the doorbell rang. It was odd. None of us ever used the doorbell. Chad and I exchanged confused looks before he got up to answer it. Moments later, I heard scuffling and a scream, one that definitely wasn't Chad's. I ran to the door and found Chad and Shad tangled up, punching and yelling. I tried to break them apart, but I bolted to Mr. Johnson's house for help. By the time we returned, Chad was unconscious, and Shad was sitting on the ground, bloodied and sobbing. His right arm was in a cast, which was now broken into pieces. This time the police came, with an ambulance. Both Chad and Shad were taken to the hospital and kept overnight. It was the first time I truly felt like an outsider. Chad's parents were difficult to get in touch with, and I was left in the dark. Meanwhile, Shad's aunt, uncle, and parents were constantly at the hospital. My parents eventually came to pick me up and wouldn't let me go back. The waiting was torture. You see, Chad was like a brother to me, and now I wasn't allowed to see him. On the second day, I learned he was being kept another night for observation due to a concussion. When Chad was finally discharged, I rode my bike straight to his house. I didn't even use my kickstand to park. I just jumped off and ran inside. What I saw nearly made me faint. Chad was sitting on the couch, cast and all, playing Crash Bandicoot with Chad. "Dude," I shouted, "what's he doing here?" Chad looked at me unfazed. "I called your house like 3 times. "Really?" I shot back. "But it's Chad. What's going on?" Chad explained everything. They were put in the same hospital room for 2 days. Apparently, the basketball incident 2 years ago wasn't intentional. It had bounced off the backboard and hit him by accident. This year, Chad had come over to apologize and make amends, but Chad panicked and instinctively started to fight him, re-breaking Chad's arm in the process. Chad then told me that on the reservation, most everyone was related. At school, kids fought against other kids who were not in their family. It was a whole other culture, and he had to learn the hard way that that isn't the way he needed to be. He initially had moved here to see how he would like school here with his aunt and uncle, but after the basketball mishap, he got scared and took a Greyhound home. That summer was tough for me. Honestly, I was jealous that Chad and Shad had become such close friends out of nowhere. I felt like a third wheel most of the time. They acted like long-lost brothers. Shad was constantly staying over at Chad's house and sometimes at mine. He even joined jiu-jitsu. Once I got to know Shad better, he wasn't the person I'd made him out to be. Eventually, the 3 of us started calling ourselves the 3 Amigos. That summer brought big news for our town. A huge announcement was made. We were getting a new hospital, a mall, a major company's call center, and most exciting of all, the old ski slope that had been shut down since the 80s was purchased and slated to reopen. Our town was about to grow in a major way. Freshman year had started, and this year Shad stayed in town. We'd never had so much fun before. Chad was nothing like the bully he used to be. He became the class clown and a star athlete, dominating football, basketball, and track. Part of the year, Shad hit a growth spurt, and he grew so fast he was hunched over until his body could adjust. He had shot up to 7'1". The guy was a tower. The next summer, as the town grew, people began moving in for the new opportunities. Even though the hospital wouldn't be finished until after our senior year, doctors were already relocating to the area. One of them moved down the street from me with his large family. The oldest daughter, Angela, was our age. She was incredibly quiet, as shy as a church mouse, as they say. Later during sophomore year, Chad, Shad, and I were assigned to a group project, and Angela ended up in our group. The first thing Shad did was call her Andy on purpose. She was upset at first, but Shad explained he called her Andy because her red hair reminded him of the character from the Goonies. The nickname stuck, and before long, everyone called her Andy. Just after our group project, we saw Andy in the hall with a well-known senior who thought every girl wanted him. He wouldn't stop bothering her. So Shad walked right up to that senior bothering her and told him off. A fight nearly broke out. But after that, Andy became part of our group, like the sister we never had. We were a quirky bunch, but we stuck together all through high school. Remember, this was a time before the internet was common. If we wanted entertainment, we actually had to watch TV. During senior year, we'd get together to watch Tales from the Crypt. There were 2 commercials we loved to mock. One featured a guy talking about the new mall, saying, "Come on down, see the sights, and remember to bring the family." The other was for a local travel agency. It ended with a camera panning over a forested area, and we always joked, "Someday we'll go hiking there." Well, we soon found out where that area of land was. Shad and I got a job at the end of our senior year to place GPS markers and flags through several sections of some wilderness just south of us. for new wilderness trails. The trails summited several lower elevation mountains for more moderate hikes. When they showed us the pictures of where the trails would be going, we noticed one of the areas was over the same mountainous area as that commercial. "Imagine that," Shad joked. We had till September, pretty much summer, to finish placing all the markers. We didn't think it would be so bad, but when we received the supplies, packs, maps, GPSs, and the marking material, we were a bit overwhelmed. The flag shooter to place the marker flags was a bit bulky, and it felt like we were given miles of ribbons. Shad commented, "Glad we don't have to carry this all at once," which reminded me that we were doing just small sections at a time. We were told that the ribbons through the wooded areas needed to be placed every 250 feet, and in the valleys, marker flags would need to be placed every 0.2 miles, unless the trail curved. We planned to have Chad and Andy join us for the first area to mark, since their jobs didn't begin until a few weeks after graduation. Like all parents, Chad and Andy's parents had concerns about our plan. We reassured them that having these GPS units and plenty of supplies, we would be okay. Early one morning, we drove the 50 miles to the trailhead parking lot, unloaded our gear, and started our adventure/work. By noon, we'd hiked about 6 miles and reached the base of one of the mountains where the current trail snaked around. We took a break, had some snacks, before we began the ascent. Since no obvious trail existed, we had to rely strictly on the GPS units. Our GPS showed we were at about 5,200 feet elevation, and the mountain summit was around 8,400 feet. Not too high. The plan was to hike until 7 p.m., placing markers according to the map, then set up camp below the tree line and summit the next afternoon. Then we'd make our way down the backside and connect to the existing trail. But our plans changed around 3 p.m. that day. As we hiked up the mountain, we realized placing the markers was a lot slower than we expected. When we reached a spot where it leveled off, something fluttering in the wind caught our eye. Hanging in a tree was a silver mask attached to a black cloak. Shad reached over and pulled it down. We all examined it. The mask's mouth was a creepy grin. The eyes' sockets had these wrinkly rings going around them, and the forehead had 2 small horns adorning it. The cloak was shiny like silk and was more like a suit. It had a cloak in the front and in the back. Underneath the front cloak were loose sleeves and leggings. Shad, being the joker he was, immediately dropped his pack and put it on. The cloakish suit covered him, but not completely due to his height. The sleeves that hung loose came to his elbows. Before he stood up, he started doing the Kazatsky kick, a Russian dance where you crouch and kick out your legs. We laughed so hard, but when he stood up, the cloak almost reached his knees. "It's a hobbit's cloak," he joked. Andy commented on his funny appearance, and then reminded us of the markers we had to do. "Come on, let's get back to marking so we can finish up on time." Then we heard it, a faint whisper on the wind. Voices. Our laughter went to silence in an instant. Then, in the distance, we saw someone else, wearing the same cloak, the same mask. Chad broke the silence. "Looks like they left this one behind." Andy froze, eyes wide. "Let's leave," she said. Her voice was shaky. "Now, please." Before we could act, Shad had vanished. "Where's Shad?" I asked, in a panic. Then I saw a cloaked figure running off in the distance. "There he goes," I whispered. Without thinking, we followed him, crouching low as we moved.
"Where is he?"
A strange voice called from the trees. We stopped, hiding behind a small grove of trees, and stashed our packs. The cloaked group stood in a strange formation. Chad snuck off to get a better look, then came back. "There's a big ring of rocks in the clearing, with a 6-pointed pentagram in it." "It's a hexagram," Andy whispered. "Did you see him?" I asked urgently. "I don't know which one would be him," Chad whispered. Let's get closer. We'll have a better view from that fallen tree. He pointed to the other side of the group of masked individuals. We silently made our way up through the forest, coming down to the tree. Peering through the branches, we could see something in the center of the hexagram that was covered by what appeared to be a bloody cloth. "Is that blood?" Andy asked, panic creeping into her voice. "No, it's ketchup," I said. "I hope it's not a body," Andy whispered, her eyes bulging with fear.
Where is he?
A voice from the circle asked. We noticed a gap in the hexagram. One spot was missing a figure. Then we saw Shad walking toward the circle, his movements strange, his height very much shortened, as he appeared to be crouched down and bunched up inside that masked costume. "You can tell that's Shad," Chad whispered. "What's he doing?" "I don't know, but that is definitely him," I quietly replied. Shad must have inspected the scene as he stepped into the circle, taking the vacant spot. From behind the fallen tree, I strained to get a better look at the masked group. They moved with an eerie synchronicity, slightly swaying in their spots, their cloaks slightly rustling in the breeze. The circle wasn't random. Each of them stood in precise alignment, their positions at each point of the hexagram. In the middle, the figures were standing at the crossing intersections. The blood-streaked cloth was at the center. One of the figures on the cross-section suddenly stepped forward to speak. His voice was deep as he addressed the group.
"The offering has been made. Now we summon him. He who dwells beneath the earth, whose power we crave."
He stepped back and raised his arm as others followed.
An offering from the sky.
The figures on the outside of the circle recited.
An offering from the land.
The figures inside the circle spoke. Their arms moved straight. Shad's movements were hesitant by the undersized ensemble as he followed along.
Grant us thine power, he who dwells below.
They all chanted in a haunting melody.
Grant us our desires, our souls we give.
"Stop, stop, stop!" An angry voice suddenly rang out from the trees. It made almost everyone jump. A shirtless man in his briefs stepped forward, holding Shad's pack. His shirt draped over his face to hide it. The cloaked figures turned toward him. "One of you," he said scoldingly and pointing, "has my silver shade. Give it back. I demand it now and you'll go free." He dropped the pack on the ground. All the figures turned to look at Shad. It was clear that since he was the last one to join, he must be the imposter. I hoped he would just take off the cloak and grab his pack, but he didn't. Instead, Shad let out a low, menacing laugh, a growl that sent chills down my spine. He began to shake, his voice deep and eerie. "Master, grant me power to grow so I may seize these false men who pretend to know thee." Shad's figure trembled as he slowly rose, his height increasing unnaturally to those that didn't know him. The cloak rose to end at his knees. Several figures in the circle stepped back, but some moved toward him. "Let my arms grow so I may seize those who do not know," Shad growled. He pushed his arms through the sleeves then, stretching them out to what they might see as unnatural lengths. He now looked almost twice the size than when he was hunched up. "Leave," he commanded, his voice echoing. "None of you are true believers." Shad's towering form must have shocked a few of them, as several of the figures on the outer edge of the circle backed further away. But the ones in the middle moved closer. I didn't know what would happen next, but I couldn't wait any longer. I whispered to Chad and Andy. "Andy, throw whatever you can to draw attention once we go in. Just wait for the right moment. Chad, remember the Uchimata? The throw?" I motioned with my arms low. "Let's use the forest floor to our advantage. It won't be as soft as a mat." Chad nodded but looked doubtful. "What if they start a fight?" He lipped to me. "Then we fight back," I said, almost under my breath. We crawled to the end of the tree where it had uprooted and readied ourselves. I wasn't planning to attack, I just wanted to cause some confusion by taking down a few of the masked figures. We needed to get the attention off of Shad, so he could run and we could get out of there. While Shad had everyone distracted with his towering presence and commanding voice, Chad and I made our move. We dashed out from behind the fallen tree. I'm sure Chad was just as nervous as I was. We took the two masked figures we snuck up to, off guard, and flipped them onto their backs with a swift throw. A thud sounded as they hit the forest floor with muffled grunts. Others then turned to see the commotion. As we moved past the bloody sheet, it got pulled away to reveal a dead, bloody rabbit and bird. It was apparent that if they had killed those animals on the spot, they had at least a knife on them somewhere. From behind the dead tree, Andy started to hurl sticks and pine cones. Her aim wasn't effective, but it did distract a few of them. One of the projectiles struck a cloaked figure square on the head, who was facing Shad, making him divert his attention. Shad, seeing our effort, joined the fray. He grabbed two of the masked men by their cloaks, lifting them up, causing them to fall. The remaining figures hesitated, unsure of what to do. Shad seized the moment, dashing past the shirtless man, grabbing his discarded pack as Andy yelled, "Let's go!" The shirtless man stood stiff like he didn't want to move. Shad, after grabbing his pack, turned and yanked the shirt off his face. For a moment, we saw his shocked face clearly, before he could cover it with his hands. It was the man from the mall commercial. His face was unmistakable, even with his wild, unkempt hair and crazed expression.
"Come on down, see the sights, and remember to bring the family,"
Shad bellowed, perfectly mimicking the man's cheerful tone from the commercial. His voice echoed through the forest, adding to the confusion and chaos. The rest of us scrambled to grab our packs. My adrenaline was surging. We joined Shad in his mad dash down the hill. He still wore the mask and cloak, the silver face catching glimmers of light through the trees as we ran. As upset as I was, I couldn't help but laugh. Behind us, a few of the cloaked figures gave chase, their voices carrying an unsettling mixture of anger and confusion. But the uneven, rocky descent worked in our favor. It quickly became clear that these masked pursuers weren't in any shape for a downhill sprint. Their footsteps grew fainter as the incline steepened, and soon they gave up entirely. We did not stop running until the sound of their pursuit faded completely. My lungs were burning by then, when we finally paused at a cluster of boulders further down the hill. Shad yanked off the mask and cloak, collapsing onto the ground in exhausted laughter.
"Master, grant me power to grow,"
he mocked himself, still breathless. We couldn't help but laugh too. A mix of relief and disbelief washed over us. Andy doubled over and gasped for air, then finally managed to speak. "That was the dumbest, stupidest, most idiotic thing," she trailed off, struggling to catch her breath. Chad, sitting on the ground and equally out of breath, let out a raspy laugh.
"Stupid? Yes. Dumb? Definitely. Funny? Oh yeah. And even funnier now,"
he added with a crooked grin, wiping sweat off his face. I sat there silently, my heart still racing, unsure of what to say. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air. Shad, sprawled out on a rock and still catching his breath, finally broke the silence.
"I'm sorry guys, I couldn't help it. But come on, how was I supposed to know a cult selling their souls was gonna be up here?"
He chuckled nervously, rubbing the back of his neck.
"Dude, we'll have to do this section of the trail last. I'm not gonna go back up there for a while,"
he finished saying to me before falling silent again. "Yeah, sounds good to me," I quietly replied. It was quiet for a minute or two until Andy spoke up. She shook her head, getting our attention. "You're lucky they didn't do more than just chase us." Her voice was calmer now, but her expression still showed a mix of fear and disbelief. "They could have had a gun. It was stupid, but yeah, it was also funny." She grinned a little. Once we'd all caught our breaths and gathered our wits, we agreed it was time to head back to the trailhead. The sun was low, casting long shadows through the trees as we retraced our steps to the trail. By the time we made it back, the parking lot was still empty. Andy's car was the only car there. The stillness of dusk added an eerie edge to the adventure we just had. I pulled out the map and scanned it. "There's another trailhead entrance a little further south," I jokingly pointed out. Andy shook her head firmly. "No way! What if they parked over there?" We all exchanged glances and quickly agreed against it. None of us were eager to take the chance of running into that group again. Instead, we decided to call it a day and head home. That section, like Shad said, would have to be the last section of trail we would have to finish marking. Shad and I finished up all the section of trails by mid-August. We saw lots of hikers, but never a big group that was near in number as the masked group. For months afterward, that commercial haunted us each time it played on TV. The mall man's familiar face and cheery tagline sent a chill down our spines. "Come on down, see the sights, and remember to bring the family." It was a joke we couldn't laugh at without the shivers. We went to the mall a few times afterward, hoping to catch sight of him, but he was never there. He probably didn't have much to do with the mall and could have just been an actor in the commercial. The other masked figures, they remained a mystery. Who they were or why they were out there, we never found out. It was clear, though, they were up to no good. Selling their souls for something, chanting those eerie lines, it still gives me chills to think about. To top it off, there's now a trail that runs right through that area. It's strange to know there are people like that out there. You expect the woods to be filled with natural dangers. Bears, snakes, cliffs. But sometimes the scariest things in the wilderness aren't the animals. Sometimes it's the people. We had a good mix of stories tonight. Scary, funny even, some wholesome moments too. But don't go getting all safe and happy feeling, got it? At least pretend to leave dead and roasted tonight feeling a little scared. My job's on the line after all. Good night. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. Send me your scary work-related stories at eeriecast.com/submit and leave a rating or review on Apple or Spotify podcasts. Thank you. Now I've got to clock out, but don't you worry, I'll be seeing you again real soon.